The encounter. The warm, subdued lighting of L'Etoile, one of the city's most exclusive dining establishments, cast a sophisticated glow over the dining room. The hum of quiet conversation mixed with the soft clinking of glasses and silverware against fine china, all enveloped in the gentle strains of a string quartet playing in the corner. The patrons, dressed in elegant evening attire, were a blend of high society, corporate moguls, and elite professionals, many of whom had made this restaurant their unofficial gathering spot. Among them, Aria Lancaster commanded the room from her secluded corner table. Dressed in a tailored designer suit and adorned with a glimmering emerald necklace, she exuded confidence, bordering on intimidation. Her gaze was sharp as she surveyed the menu, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping against the crystal goblet in front of her. Next to her sat her son, Oliver, a quiet, intelligent boy of 12 with a love for books and little patience for his mother's social maneuvers. "Sit up straight, Oliver," Aria instructed with a snap of her fingers, her voice low but firm. Oliver immediately straightened, his shoulders tense as he glanced around. His mother's strict posture and severe gaze kept him from speaking up or shifting in his seat, though he looked anything but comfortable in his pressed blazer. A few moments later, a waitress approached their table, carrying herself with practiced elegance and grace. Her name tag read Sophia, but it was her warm smile and gentle, confident manner that caught Oliver's attention. Sophia was in her mid-30s, her rich brown skin glowing under the dim lights, and her eyes radiated a kindness that Oliver noticed right away. She had an air of dignity that contrasted sharply with the demanding patrons she was so used to serving. "Good evening," Sophia greeted with a professional nod. "Welcome to L'Etoile. I'm Sophia, and I'll be your server tonight." Aria barely glanced up. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. "We were starting to think this service was as slow as the traffic outside." Sophia maintained her calm, unflustered demeanor and gave a small, polite nod. "I apologize for the delay, ma'am. We aim to make every visit here exceptional." As she spoke, Oliver noticed the way Sophia's smile never faltered, even in the face of his mother's cold reception. It struck him as impressive. "Please let me know if I can assist you with the menu," Sophia continued smoothly. "I'd be happy to provide recommendations." Aria waved her hand dismissively, her eyes narrowing as she looked up at the menu. "I'm capable of choosing for myself," she snapped. "Bring me the 98 chaplis. No, actually, the 97. And don't make me wait long." Sophia nodded. "Of course, Mom." Aria's gaze then turned to Oliver. "And he'll have a glass of sparkling water. No ice," she instructed before turning back to Sophia. "Do you have that written down? I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings." Sophia nodded and jotted down the order with her usual grace. "Absolutely, Mom. I'll bring your drinks right away." Without another word, Aria turned back to her menu, as if Sophia had already vanished from her consciousness. Oliver, feeling embarrassed, managed a small, polite smile toward Sophia, who responded with a reassuring nod. As Sophia made her way back to the bar, Oliver's eyes followed her. Something about her presence felt comforting, a sense of genuine warmth in a place as cold and structured as L'Etoile. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt over his mother's behavior. It wasn't the first time he'd seen her treat people this way, dismissive and sometimes even rude to anyone she deemed beneath her. But tonight, something about it made him uneasy. When Sophia returned with their drinks, Aria looked up with barely concealed irritation. "Took you long enough." Sophia placed the wine in front of Aria, followed by the glass of sparkling water for Oliver. "I hope you both enjoy these. Can I answer any questions about our menu?" Aria arched an eyebrow, her eyes sweeping over Sophia in a way that made Oliver's face burn with embarrassment. "Yes, actually. I'd like to know if there's someone else available to take over for you," she said, her tone icy. "I was hoping for a level of service more aligned with L'Etoile's standards." Sophia's serene expression faltered just slightly. She took a steadying breath and nodded, her hands clasped in front of her. I'm the only server assigned to this section tonight, ma'am. But I assure you, I'm fully prepared to make this a memorable experience. A memorable experience, Arya repeated with a derisive laugh, loud enough that a few heads turned. We'll see about that. Oliver shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze fixed on his untouched glass of sparkling water. He felt an ache in his chest, a sense of helplessness watching his mother belittle someone who had done nothing to deserve it. As Sophia turned to leave, Arya spoke up again, her voice a calculated mixture of volume and venom. It's unbelievable, really, she said, her eyes glancing around to make sure others were within earshot. One expects a certain caliber of service, and instead, we're met with. She let the sentence hang in the air, her meaning clear without needing to say another word. Her sharp words echoed across the room, a jarring contrast to the otherwise refined atmosphere. Sophia paused, her back to Arya, and for a moment, Oliver thought he saw her shoulders tense. But when she turned back, her face was once again composed, her professionalism firmly in place. Please let me know if there's anything further I can do to improve your experience, Mom, she said, her voice steady and unyielding. Arya's lips twisted into a thin smile. Oh, I will. Believe me. As Sophia walked away, Oliver looked up at his mother, unable to hold back any longer. Mom, I don't think she did anything wrong. You don't have to talk to her like that. Arya turned her steely gaze onto her son, her expression one of shock and mild irritation. Oliver, mind your manners, she said sharply. You don't understand these things. People need to know their place. It's how the world works. Oliver swallowed, feeling a surge of frustration and sadness. He wanted to say something, anything, but he knew from experience that speaking up would only lead to more trouble. Instead, he kept his gaze down, his hands fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth. Moments later, Sophia returned with their appetizers, her face composed and professional, though her hands held a subtle tremor. She placed the plates in front of them carefully, doing her best to avoid Arya's penetrating stare. I specifically requested the dressing on the side, Arya said, pushing her salad away with a look of disdain. Do you even listen to your customers? Sophia, despite the tension in her posture, nodded. I apologize for the oversight, ma'am. I'll correct it right away. Don't bother, Arya snapped. I've lost my appetite watching this display of incompetence. She made sure to speak loud enough for nearby diners to hear, reveling in the attention her words drew. A hush fell over the tables around them. People glanced over, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Sophia's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, though she managed to keep her voice steady. Is there anything else I can do for you, ma'am? She asked, her eyes meeting Arya's with a quiet resilience that Oliver couldn't help but admire. Arya scoffed. Just bring the check. We're done here. Sophia inclined her head, her expression unreadable, and walked away with a grace that left a marked silence in her wake. The diners nearby watched her, some with pity, others with veiled anger, yet no one dared to speak up. The unraveling. As Sophia disappeared back into the kitchen, Oliver couldn't shake the tension coiling in his stomach. He looked at his mother, watching her casually sip her wine, as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Around them, murmurs floated through the air as diners exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Arya seemed impervious to their silent judgment. Oliver cleared his throat softly. Mom, don't you think you were a bit harsh? Arya's eyes flicked toward him, narrowing slightly. Harsh, she repeated, as if the word were foreign to her. Oliver, people like Sophia need to know their place. They're here to serve, and if they can't do their job properly, they should expect to face consequences. It's called accountability. Oliver opened his mouth, then closed it, realizing any attempt to reason with her was futile. Still, he felt a surge of frustration and embarrassment on Sophia's behalf, as though her humiliation had seeped into him. He glanced around the room, hoping someone might intervene or express the discomfort he was too afraid to voice. But the surrounding tables remained quiet, each person buried in their own world, unwilling to step into the fray Arya had created. Minutes passed, but instead of Sophia, another woman approached the table. She was petite, dressed in business attire with her dark hair neatly pinned up. Her name tag read Lucia beneath the title manager. She stood before Arya with a professional, measured expression that suggested years of experience handling difficult customers. "Good evening, ma'am," Lucia greeted, inclining her head slightly. "I'm Lucia, the manager here at Toil. I wanted to personally apologize if there's been any misunderstanding or inconvenience. How may I assist you?" Arya looked up, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Well, finally. I was starting to wonder if this establishment even had a manager," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm afraid the level of service here tonight has been subpar, to say the least." Lucia's face remained calm, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of weariness. "I understand, ma'am. I want to assure you that our staff is committed to providing excellent service, and I apologize if we have not met your expectations tonight." Arya's smirk deepened. "It's not just my expectations, Ms. Lucia. Toil has a reputation, and I'd hate to see it tarnished by unsuitable staff." Lucia's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained gentle. "Ma'am, our staff undergoes rigorous training, and I assure you that everyone here is fully qualified. If there's a specific issue with your service, I'd be happy to address it." Arya leaned back in her chair, her posture exuding an air of condescension. Is it too much to ask for a waitress who understands the importance of detail? This woman, Sophia, I believe, lacked the basic skills I expect when dining in an establishment of this caliber. Lucia's eyes held Arya's gaze steadily, her voice unwavering. "Sophia is one of our most valued team members. She has been with us for several years and consistently provides exceptional service. If there's anything specific that went wrong tonight, I'd be glad to address it." The firmness in Lucia's tone seemed to catch Arya off guard, her expression faltering momentarily. She glanced around, noticing a few patrons glancing their way, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disapproval. "Perhaps you should reconsider who you hire," Arya said, her voice lower but no less pointed. "It's not only about skill. It's about presentation, and Toil should reflect a certain standard." A faint flicker of something unreadable passed over Lucia's face, but she maintained her composure. "We strive to reflect that standard, ma'am, and that includes treating all patrons and staff with respect and dignity." Arya opened her mouth to retort, but at that moment, Sophia returned to the floor. She carried herself with dignity, her shoulders squared and her expression serene. Though Oliver could see the tension in her jaw as she approached the table, she stood just behind Lucia, nodding slightly as if to indicate her readiness to continue serving. Lucia turned to Sophia with a slight smile. "Thank you, Sophia. I appreciate your patience." Sophia nodded, then addressed Arya directly. "I apologize once again if I failed to meet your expectations, ma'am. It's always my goal to provide the best experience for each guest." The way she spoke, with a gentle strength that refused to buckle under Arya's scrutiny, filled Oliver with a sense of quiet admiration. He wanted to say something, to thank her, or offer an apology, but his voice felt trapped in his throat. Arya huffed, dismissing Sophia's apology with a wave of her hand. "If you want to improve, I'd suggest paying more attention to detail. You're in the service industry, after all." Just then, a man approached from across the dining room, his presence commanding and his eyes fixed on the scene unfolding. He was tall, dressed in a dark, tailored suit, with salt and pepper hair and an air of authority that immediately caught everyone's attention. He walked with purpose, his gaze sweeping over Arya, Oliver, and then landing on Sophia and Lucia. The other patrons whispered, some exchanging glances as if they recognized him. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth yet firm, carrying an unmistakable hint of power. "I'm Charles DuPont, the owner of Toil." Arya's eyes widened slightly, her posture straightening as she registered the man's presence. Clearly, she hadn't expected to draw the attention of the restaurant's owner. For a moment, she looked uncertain, but she quickly masked it with her usual composed expression. "Ah, Mr. Dupont," she said, reaching out to shake his hand with an air of practiced charm. "What a pleasure to meet you. I didn't expect the owner himself to get involved, but I appreciate the dedication to addressing customer concerns." Charles took her hand briefly, but his expression remained neutral. "I make it a point to address concerns personally when they involve the well-being of my staff." Aria blinked, the polite smile slipping slightly as she processed his words. I only meant that there were certain standards I expect when dining here, and I felt that tonight's service was lacking. Surely you understand." Charles held her gaze, his expression unyielding. "I understand, ma'am. I understand that you are used to being treated with respect and courtesy, and I expect the same courtesy to be extended to my staff, who work tirelessly to make this establishment what it is." The firmness in his tone seemed to leave Aria momentarily speechless. She glanced at Oliver, perhaps expecting him to support her, but his eyes were fixed on the table, his discomfort evident. Charles continued, his voice calm but unwavering. "Sophia is one of the most dedicated, hard-working individuals in this restaurant. She is part of the reason Old Detoil has such an esteemed reputation. So if there was an issue with your service, I suggest we address it constructively, without the need for personal attacks." Aria's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She opened her mouth, but words seemed to fail her. She shifted uncomfortably under Charles's penetrating gaze, realizing she was rapidly losing control of the situation. I was simply pointing out areas where I thought the service could be improved." Aria stammered, her voice losing some of its usual sharpness. Charles nodded slowly. "Then let's agree that there are ways to communicate those concerns respectfully. Our staff deserves to be treated with the same level of respect that you expect." Around the room, diners exchanged glances, some nodding in approval of Charles's words. The entire atmosphere of the restaurant seemed to shift, as if a collective tension had been released. Aria looked around, sensing the silent judgment of the other patrons, and for the first time, her confidence faltered. After a brief pause, Charles turned to Sophia, offering her a small, encouraging smile. "Sophia, thank you for your exceptional service tonight. I apologize for any disrespect you've endured, and I want you to know your work is deeply appreciated." Sophia inclined her head, her voice steady despite the lingering tension. "Thank you, Mr. Dupont." Charles looked back at Aria, his expression softening only slightly. "Ma'am, if you feel you'd be more comfortable dining elsewhere tonight, I would understand." Aria's eyes flashed with indignation, but she could see she was no longer in control. She glanced at Oliver, whose downcast expression spoke volumes. Her face flushed deeper as she realized the extent of her public humiliation. After a strained moment, Aria forced a tight smile. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Dupont. We'll finish our meal." Charles inclined his head politely. "As you wish." With that, he walked away, leaving Aria and Oliver in a tense, uncomfortable silence. Aria's face was still flushed, her composure shattered. For once, she seemed at a loss for words, her eyes darting around the room, trying to avoid the curious glances of the other diners. Oliver glanced at Sophia, offering her a small, apologetic smile. Sophia returned it with a gentle nod, and in that brief moment, he felt a surge of relief, a small reassurance that, despite everything, dignity had prevailed. The unmasking. As the tension lingered at the table, Aria could feel the weight of the room's collective judgment pressing down on her. The proud woman who usually commanded attention with her icy confidence now sat visibly shaken, her composed facade cracked by the events of the evening. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her sense of superiority. But it felt elusive. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass of wine, taking a sip as if the act itself would calm her racing heart. Oliver, sitting across from her, noticed the slight shake in her hand. For the first time, He felt a flicker of pity for his mother, despite his deep-seated frustration with her behavior. Tonight, he had witnessed a side of her that made him question everything he thought he knew about her. Her arrogance, her entitlement, and her willingness to tear others down to maintain her own sense of control. His mother's world, where power and status dictated everything, felt increasingly fragile. Sophia, meanwhile, returned to her duties with grace, though Oliver could see the tension still lingering in her posture. She moved through the tables with renewed purpose, tending to other patrons with an air of professionalism that bordered on defiance. It was as if she had taken the sting of Aria's words and channeled it into a fierce, quiet resilience, refusing to let it break her. Her poise drew admiring glances from several diners, some of whom offered her words of encouragement as she passed by. While Aria fidgeted with her napkin, trying to pretend she was unaffected, a distinguished older woman seated nearby leaned over, catching her attention. She was impeccably dressed, her silver hair styled elegantly, her demeanor one of quiet authority that seemed to command respect. "Pardon me," the woman began, her voice soft but firm. "I couldn't help but notice the situation earlier. Forgive me for saying this, but your son appears to have a better sense of respect and empathy than you do." Aria's eyes widened, her face flushing with indignation. "Excuse me," she replied, her voice clipped and sharp. "I don't believe it's your place to make judgments about my parenting." The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Aria's attempted rebuff. "I've seen enough in my life to know that kindness and dignity should not be selective. No one is above treating others with respect, regardless of their role or status." Aria's lips thinned, but she couldn't find a suitable retort. The words seemed to hit her in a way she hadn't expected, leaving her momentarily speechless. Oliver, sensing an opportunity, spoke up, his voice trembling but resolute. "Mom, I think maybe we should apologize to Sophia. What happened tonight? It wasn't right." Aria shot him a disapproving look, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It was one of quiet defiance, a determination she hadn't seen before. She was used to him being compliant, eager to please, but tonight something had shifted. Her son, the child she believed she had carefully molded, was slipping from her control, standing up in a way that challenged everything she held dear. Before Aria could respond, a soft yet firm voice interrupted them. "Mrs. Lancaster," Sophia said, having quietly returned to the table. Her expression was one of calm resolution, her gaze meeting Aria's without a hint of deference. "If there's anything else you need tonight, please let me know. I'll do my best to ensure you have a pleasant dining experience from this point forward." Aria's mouth opened and closed, struggling to form a coherent response. She felt the weight of judgment from all sides, from the nearby diners, from her own son, and most disturbingly, from within herself. For the first time, she wondered if she had taken things too far, if her behavior had crossed a line. Unable to bring herself to apologize, she muttered, "Thank you," barely meeting Sophia's eyes. Sophia nodded, a faint but knowing smile tugging at the corner of her lips. It was the smile of someone who understood her own strength, someone who had weathered worse storms than the one Aria had attempted to unleash. Without another word, Sophia turned and resumed her duties, her movements graceful and poised as ever. After a long, uncomfortable silence, Oliver cleared his throat and glanced at his mother. "Mom, I'm going to the restroom," he said, rising from his seat. He needed a moment to clear his head, to process the disorienting evening. He made his way down the hallway toward the restrooms, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions, embarrassment, anger, and something else he couldn't quite name. He found himself stopping just outside the restroom, his mind replaying the scene over and over. Oliver stopped just outside the restroom, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. His thoughts were a jumble, and he needed a moment to gather himself. He leaned against the cool wall, closing his eyes, trying to sort through his feelings. Shame, frustration, and a surprising surge of admiration for Sophia swirled within him. He had always known his mother to be demanding, but tonight had shown him a side of her that left him deeply unsettled. As he stood there, lost in thought, he overheard voices coming from the small staff break room just down the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and he recognized Sophia's voice, speaking softly, but with a clarity and strength that made him pause. "Thank you, Lucia, but I can handle this," Sophia was saying. "I've dealt with difficult customers before, and tonight is no different. I can't let one woman's words define my worth." Lucia's voice responded, equally soft but filled with concern. "Sophia, you shouldn't have to tolerate that kind of treatment. Charles is right. We're here to protect our staff, and you deserve respect." There was a pause, and Oliver could almost picture the determined set of Sophia's jaw as she replied, "I know, but people like her, they come and go. I've worked too hard, overcome too much, to let someone like Arya Lancaster make me question my place here. Besides, my son looks up to me. I have to show him that dignity and self-respect aren't things you give away." The words hit Oliver like a wave. He hadn't known Sophia had a son, but it didn't surprise him. There was something maternal, warm, and quietly fierce about her that reminded him of his favorite teachers, the ones who'd always encouraged him to do his best. He couldn't imagine her child being anything but proud to have her as a mother. Just as he was about to walk back to his table, Sophia emerged from the break room, her expression one of quiet strength. She noticed Oliver standing there and paused, giving him a gentle smile. "Oh, Oliver," she said, her voice warm but slightly surprised. "Are you all right?" He nodded, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I wanted to apologize, Miss Sophia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for what my mom said. It wasn't fair. She shouldn't have treated you like that." Sophia's expression softened, and she placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Oliver. That means a lot to me. But you don't have to apologize for her actions. I know it wasn't easy for you to watch, and I appreciate your kindness." Oliver felt a swell of relief mixed with gratitude. Sophia's calm acceptance, her ability to brush off the cruelty she'd endured, only made him admire her more. "You're really brave," he blurted out, then quickly looked down, feeling shy. Sophia chuckled softly. "Bravery isn't always about big, loud gestures, Oliver. Sometimes it's just about standing your ground, knowing who you are, and refusing to let others dictate your worth. You remember that?" He nodded, her words sinking in deeply. As he walked back to the table, he felt a strange sense of clarity, as if Sophia's strength had infused him with his own courage. He resolved to carry that lesson with him, no matter what his mother or anyone else thought. When Oliver returned to his seat, he found his mother sitting stiffly, her eyes fixed on her wine glass. She glanced up at him, her gaze searching his face, as if trying to gauge his thoughts. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something meaningful, perhaps even an apology, but she simply cleared her throat and looked away. "Did you wash your hands?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Yes, Mom," Oliver replied, biting back the urge to say more. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and didn't have the energy for another confrontation. As they resumed their meal in awkward silence, Oliver noticed Sophia moving from table to table with her usual grace, a steady presence even in the face of earlier humiliation. She never once looked their way, but Oliver felt as if she had already made her point, one that spoke louder than words. Her dignity, her resilience, had done more to unmask the flaws in his mother's behavior than any direct confrontation could. The sound of a phone buzzing broke the silence at their table. Arya pulled her phone from her purse, glancing at the screen with a frown. Her face turned ashen, and her hands began to tremble as she read the message. Oliver watched her, his curiosity piqued. He'd rarely seen his mother show such vulnerability. "What's wrong?" he asked, surprised by the alarm in his own voice. Arya didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the screen. Finally, she took a shaky breath and muttered, "It's a business matter." Something unexpected came up. Oliver didn't fully understand, but he could sense that whatever news she'd received had shaken her deeply. For once, his mother looked almost small, as if the walls of her carefully constructed world were closing in around her. Then, as if on cue, Charles DuPont reappeared, his calm, authoritative presence adding a new tension to the room. He approached their table, hands clasped in front of him, his expression unreadable. Aria looked up at him, her usual composure nowhere to be found. "Mrs. Lancaster," he began, his tone polite but firm, "I wanted to inform you that we've received word regarding your recent business dealings." Aria's face paled, and she glanced at Oliver, as if wishing he wasn't there to witness this. "I don't know what you mean, Mr. DuPont," she stammered, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Charles gave a small nod. "I don't want to intrude on your private matters, but I felt it necessary to bring something to your attention. It appears your company's recent acquisition may be under review for potential misconduct." Aria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. "But that's impossible. I have the best legal team, the best advisors. This is just a misunderstanding." Charles's gaze was steady, unyielding. "Perhaps, but it may interest you to know that Sophia's family has deep ties in the business community. In fact, her father is one of the largest investors in your latest acquisition." Aria blinked, processing this new information. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at Sophia, who was now standing a few tables away, her calm demeanor unchanged. For the first time, Aria saw Sophia not as a mere server, but as someone with power, influence, someone who could alter the course of her carefully built empire. Charles continued, his voice calm but pointed. "I would suggest, Mrs. Lancaster, that you reconsider how you treat those around you. Status and wealth may offer certain advantages, but they are not a substitute for respect and integrity. It's a lesson we all must learn, one way or another." Aria's face reddened, her bravado entirely stripped away. She sat in stunned silence, her gaze darting between Charles and Sophia, realization dawning on her that her actions had not only been witnessed, but could also have repercussions that extended beyond this single evening. Seeing her mother humbled, Oliver felt a strange mix of emotions: sympathy, vindication, and something he could only describe as relief. He had always sensed, deep down, that the world his mother had tried to impose on him was brittle, built on superficial values that could easily crumble. As the evening wore on, Sophia continued her work, moving between tables with grace and dignity, a living testament to the strength she'd spoken of earlier. And as Oliver watched her, he felt a deep gratitude for her quiet resilience, a quality that had unmasked the harsh truths about his mother's world in ways he would never forget. The evening at Upscale had started as a simple dinner, but it had evolved into something far more profound, a reckoning that exposed the fractures in Aria Lancaster's armor, leaving her vulnerable, humbled, and perhaps finally aware of the power of respect and kindness. The reckoning. As the evening at Upscale unfolded, Aria sat in stunned silence, the weight of Charles DuPont's words hanging heavy in the air. The once unshakable woman, accustomed to controlling every detail of her life, felt the ground slipping from under her. For the first time, she was aware of the judgmental eyes around her, the quiet conversations and glances that hinted at her sudden fall from grace. Aria's mind reeled, trying to piece together what had happened, to make sense of the unexpected revelation about Sophia's family ties and her father's investment in Aria's latest business venture. The timing couldn't have been worse. She had poured everything into the acquisition, positioning herself to secure a substantial deal that would not only cement her power in her industry, but also elevate her to a new level of influence. The Lancaster name had always been associated with success, and she had worked tirelessly to uphold that legacy. Yet now, all of it felt as fragile as glass. One wrong move, one whispered story of her public behavior, and her entire empire could come crashing down. She shot a quick, panicked glance at Oliver, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was sympathy there, yes, but also a firmness she hadn't expected, as though her son was seeing her clearly for the first time. Determined to regain control, Arya set down her wine glass, folded her hands, and cleared her throat, regaining her composed tone, though a hint of strain was evident. She glanced up to find Charles still standing there, his expression patient yet unwavering. "Mr. Dupont," she began, her voice soft but with an edge of forced composure, "I believe we've had some misunderstandings tonight. I apologize if my actions were misinterpreted." Charles met her gaze steadily, his expression unreadable. "Misinterpretations can happen," he replied. "But respect is never a matter of misinterpretation, Mrs. Lancaster. It's a choice, one that I believe we all must make consciously, regardless of who we are or what titles we hold." Arya struggled to maintain her composure, her confidence rattled by his words. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she hadn't meant any real harm, but deep down, she knew it would be a hollow defense. The truth was undeniable. Her sense of superiority had clouded her judgment. What she once saw as her right, others now saw as arrogance. Her thoughts drifted to Sophia, who had remained composed, dignified, and resolute in the face of Arya's contempt. Arya knew many people in high society, but she couldn't recall meeting anyone who had Sophia's quiet strength. It was a quality that both intrigued and unsettled her, something she had always dismissed as unimportant in her own pursuit of power. "Mrs. Lancaster," Charles continued, breaking through her thoughts, "as the owner of this establishment, I believe in giving people second chances, whether they are my employees or my patrons. We all have moments of weakness, after all." His tone softened slightly, but Arya detected a firmness beneath his words. It was as if he were offering her an unspoken challenge, a chance to change, to salvage her reputation by acknowledging her behavior and showing a measure of humility. But Arya wasn't used to humility. It was a foreign concept to her, something she had always viewed as a weakness. Yet tonight, in the face of everything that had unfolded, she felt the faintest stirrings of regret. "I appreciate that, Mr. Dupont," she managed, her voice quieter now. "Perhaps I may have acted hastily." Charles nodded, acknowledging the small concession, though it was clear he was waiting for more. Silence settled around them, as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see how Arya would respond. She glanced at Oliver again, seeing the silent plea in his eyes, a plea for her to show kindness, perhaps for the first time. Taking a deep breath, Arya rose from her seat, her gaze moving to Sophia, who was standing near the far end of the room, her attention focused on a couple she was serving. She approached slowly, her footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet of the dining room. When she reached Sophia, Arya hesitated, feeling a wave of discomfort unlike anything she'd experienced before. Apologizing was something she rarely, if ever, did. But now, standing in front of the woman she had humiliated, she realized there was no other way forward. "Sophia," Arya began, her voice trembling slightly, "I owe you an apology." Sophia looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes as she met Arya's gaze. She waited in silence, her expression calm but watchful, as if gauging the sincerity of Arya's words. Arya swallowed, the discomfort settling deeper in her chest. "I was out of line," she continued. "I misjudged you, and I treated you unfairly. I let my own assumptions cloud my judgment. And for that, I am truly sorry." The words felt foreign in her mouth, strange and uncomfortable. She could feel the weight of the room's attention on her, but she forced herself to focus on Sophia, to offer an apology that felt genuine rather than forced. Sophia held her gaze, her expression thoughtful. After a moment, she nodded slowly, as though considering Arya's words carefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Lancaster," she replied, her voice quiet but filled with a calm authority. "I appreciate your apology." Arya felt a small measure of relief, though it did little to ease the embarrassment burning in her chest. She realized, with a sudden clarity, that no amount of status or wealth could shield her from the consequences of her actions. Respect was something that couldn't be bought or demanded. It had to be earned, and tonight, she had failed in every way that mattered. Just as she turned to leave, Sophia spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "You know, Mrs. Lancaster, I believe in the importance of treating people with dignity. I don't hold grudges, but I do hope that tonight has shown you that we're all deserving of respect, no matter our position." Arya nodded, unable to find the words to respond. Her mind was spinning, her carefully constructed world unraveling before her eyes. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, separating herself from those she deemed unworthy of her time, that she had forgotten what it meant to see others as equals. Tonight had shattered that illusion, and she was left to grapple with the consequences. As she walked back to her table, Arya felt Oliver's gaze on her, his expression a mixture of relief and approval. He gave her a small smile, one that held a hint of admiration she hadn't seen before. It was as if her son, too, was seeing her in a new light, and she couldn't deny the sense of pride that filled her in that moment. For the first time, she had done something he could be proud of, something that went beyond the superficial success she had always valued. When they returned to their seats, Arya felt the silence between them shift, no longer heavy with unspoken resentment, but filled with a quiet understanding. Oliver's respect mattered more to her now than she had ever realized, and she resolved, silently, to become the kind of person he could look up to, someone who valued integrity over power. As the evening drew to a close, Charles DuPont approached their table once more, offering Arya a polite nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Lancaster. I appreciate your efforts to make amends tonight." Arya inclined her head, acknowledging his words. "Thank you, Mr. DuPont. I understand the importance of respect more clearly now." Charles' expression softened, his voice losing its earlier severity. "We all have our moments, Mrs. Lancaster. Growth isn't easy, but it's often the most valuable path we can take." With a final nod, Charles walked away, leaving Arya and Oliver to finish their meal. The atmosphere had shifted. The room was no longer filled with tension, but a sense of quiet acceptance, as if the night's events had restored a balance that had been upset by Arya's earlier actions. As they stood to leave, Oliver turned to her, a glint of hope in his eyes. "Mom, are we going to change?" The question hung between them, filled with possibility. Arya hesitated, feeling a surge of uncertainty, but also something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe tonight was the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild not only her reputation, but also her relationship with her son and her own sense of self-worth. "Yes, Oliver," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "I think we are." And as they walked out of Toil together, Arya felt the weight of the past lift slightly, replaced by the promise of a future where respect and kindness were no longer just empty words, but guiding principles that she would carry forward, one step at a time. The transformation begins. As Arya and Oliver stepped out of Toil, the cool night air greeted them, brisk and refreshing against their skin. Arya felt as though she were emerging from a cocoon of her own making, a cocoon built on assumptions, arrogance, and the desire to control. Tonight had torn that cocoon open, forcing her to confront a side of herself she could no longer ignore. They walked in silence to the car, the weight of the evening still hanging between them. Oliver, usually quiet and reserved around his mother, seemed different now. He walked with a quiet confidence, as if he, too, had undergone a transformation that evening. Arya glanced down at her son, feeling an overwhelming urge to say something meaningful, something that would convey the complicated tangle of emotions stirring within her. As they drove home, Arya's mind kept returning to Sophia and Charles. The encounter at Toil felt surreal, as if it had been a dream. A bizarre, humiliating, yet strangely enlightening dream. She had been so accustomed to seeing herself as above others, but Sophia had exposed a fundamental truth. Real strength didn't come from money or power. It came from resilience, from self-respect, and from treating others with the dignity they deserved. "Mom, Oliver's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Yes, sweetheart. She glanced at him, her heart softening at the sight of his earnest expression. I'm really proud of you, he said quietly, for saying sorry. That was brave. Aria's heart clenched at his words, and she felt a pang of shame for all the years she had dismissed these softer qualities as weaknesses. In her mind, kindness and humility had been traits for the powerless. But tonight, her son's pride in her apology felt more fulfilling than any corporate achievement or social accolade she had ever received. Thank you, Oliver, she replied, her voice catching slightly. I think I'm learning that bravery can look different than I thought. They fell silent again, but the air between them felt warmer, as if the apology she had given to Sophia had extended to her son, bridging a gap she hadn't even realized existed. When they arrived home, Aria went through her usual routine, slipping out of her heels, removing her jewelry, and setting aside her designer handbag. But tonight, these rituals felt hollow, stripped of the pride they once held. She looked around her luxurious home, taking in the polished marble floors, the imported art, the pristine furniture, all meticulously arranged to project an image of success and refinement. Yet, for the first time, she felt as though she were looking at it all through new eyes. The wealth, the power, it suddenly felt insubstantial, like a carefully constructed facade that could crumble with the slightest tremor. After Oliver went to bed, Aria found herself standing by the large picture window in the living room, staring out at the city lights. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted irrevocably tonight, as if a door had opened within her, offering a glimpse into a different way of living, one where her sense of worth wasn't tied to dominance and control. Her thoughts drifted back to Sophia's words, about dignity, about the quiet strength that came from standing firm in one's self-worth without needing to belittle others. She felt a sudden urge to change, not just superficially, but on a deep fundamental level. It was a feeling that both scared and excited her. But where would she begin? The next morning, Aria woke with a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about her business meetings, her social calendar, or her endless checklist of accomplishments. Instead, her mind was preoccupied with a singular thought. How could she begin to live differently? How could she become someone her son could be proud of, not just in a moment of apology, but consistently? After a quick breakfast with Oliver, Aria decided to take an unusual step. She went to her study and sat down at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she composed an email. She typed out a message to Sophia, the words coming slowly at first, then with a growing clarity and honesty that surprised her. Subject: a personal thank you. Dear Sophia, I wanted to take a moment to reach out, not in the heat of the moment, but after a night of reflection. I realized that my behavior toward you at El Litoil was deeply hurtful, and for that, I am truly sorry. My apology last night may have been the beginning, but I feel that I owe you more than just a few words spoken in the restaurant. You reminded me of a truth I had lost sight of. That respect is not something we can demand without first offering it ourselves. I realize now that the strength you showed is something I could learn from, and I am grateful to you for showing me a new perspective, even if it came at the expense of my own pride. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you know that your words made an impact. Thank you for your grace and dignity. You have inspired me to change, to become better not just as a person, but as a mother. Sincerely, Aria Lancaster. She read the message twice before hitting send, feeling a strange mix of vulnerability and relief. It was only a small gesture, but for Aria, it felt monumental. She had spent so much of her life projecting a persona of invincibility, always maintaining an iron grip on her image. But now she realized that true strength wasn't about invincibility. It was about acknowledging one's flaws and striving to grow beyond them. Over the next few weeks, Aria took small but deliberate steps toward change. She made a conscious effort to be present with Oliver, to listen to him without judgment or impatience. She began volunteering for causes she'd once dismissed as unimportant, hoping to understand perspectives outside her usual social circle. She even reached out to her staff, setting up a program at her company to support their personal development, something she had never considered before. At first, her employees were wary, surprised by her sudden shift in attitude. But gradually they warmed to the idea, grateful for her newfound compassion and openness. One evening, as Aria and Oliver sat on their patio, she noticed her son watching her with quiet pride. They were sharing a rare, unguarded moment, something she realized had become more frequent since that night at L'Etoile. "You know, Mom," Oliver said, breaking the comfortable silence, "you're really different now. In a good way." Aria smiled, feeling a warmth that no business victory had ever brought her. "I hope so, sweetheart. I'm trying to be." Oliver nodded thoughtfully, his eyes shining with admiration. I think people can really change if they want to, even when it's hard." Aria reached out and took his hand, a rare gesture of affection. "Yes, Oliver, change is hard, but it's worth it. And sometimes it takes meeting someone strong, someone who isn't afraid to stand up for what they believe in, to show us the way." As they sat together under the twilight, Aria felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had spent so much of her life focused on building an empire, but now she understood that true success lay not in what she achieved, but in who she became. She thought of Sophia, her strength and resilience, and knew she owed a debt of gratitude to a woman who had taught her, in the quietest yet most profound way, that dignity was the foundation of true respect. A few days later, Aria received a response to her email from Sophia. It was brief but kind, filled with words of encouragement and a simple note of forgiveness. Sophia's words were gracious, offering Aria the second chance she sought. Aria printed the email, tucking it into a drawer in her office as a reminder of the journey she had begun. In the months that followed, Aria continued on her path of transformation. She made an effort to support her community, investing in programs that empowered those often overlooked, just as Sophia had reminded her to do. Slowly, the hardened exterior she had built around herself softened, replaced by a genuine desire to lead with integrity and compassion. And through it all, she saw the reflection of her growth in Oliver's eyes. He had watched her stumble and then rise, learning that strength wasn't about being perfect, but about being willing to change. It was a lesson he would carry with him, a legacy of humility and kindness that Aria hoped would shape his future in ways that wealth and status never could. As she looked around her now-filled life, Aria knew her transformation was far from complete. But for the first time, she welcomed the journey, embracing each step toward becoming the person she had longed, unknowingly, to be. And as she did, she carried with her the memory of that night at L'Etoile, where a quiet yet powerful woman named Sophia had shown her the true meaning of dignity, the legacy of change. Months passed, and with each day, Aria's transformation deepened. What had begun as a humbling confrontation at L'Etoile had sparked a profound and lasting journey of self-discovery, and the changes were evident not only in Aria's demeanor, but in the ripple effect it had on those around her. Her company, Lancaster Holdings, once known for its rigid corporate culture and relentless pursuit of profit, began to evolve under Aria's renewed leadership. She launched several new initiatives aimed at creating a more inclusive and supportive work environment. She held listening sessions with employees, encouraging them to share their experiences, their grievances, and their aspirations. At first, her staff approached these meetings cautiously, uncertain if her interest was genuine. But as Aria continued to engage with sincerity, her employees began to respond in kind, sharing openly and offering suggestions to improve the company's culture. Aria also set up a foundation to support underserved communities, particularly young women of color aspiring to enter the corporate world. She named the foundation after her late mother, Lillian, as a tribute to the quiet strength and resilience she had witnessed growing up. Though Aria's relationship with her own mother had been complicated, The foundation became a means of honoring Lillian's influence and recognizing the qualities she had once taken for granted. One morning, as Aria sat at her desk reviewing reports from the Foundation's latest scholarship recipients, she noticed a familiar name in one of the proposals, Sophia Jenkins. Aria's heart raced as she read the recommendation letter for Sophia, who had applied for a grant to support a community program she had developed, an initiative aimed at empowering single mothers by providing job training, financial literacy workshops, and mentorship. Moved, Aria felt a surge of pride for Sophia, whose quiet strength had become a catalyst for her own change. She picked up the phone and dialed the number for the Foundation's executive director, an old friend she had appointed to oversee the initiative. "Hello, Margaret," Aria began, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'd like to personally approve Sophia Jenkins's grant, and I want to add an additional allocation for her program." Margaret, taken aback by Aria's direct involvement, agreed readily. "Of course, Aria. Sophia's application is outstanding. It's clear she has a passion for this work." "Indeed she does," Aria replied softly. "Her dedication is something we could all learn from." Later that afternoon, Aria decided to visit Sophia's program in person. She arranged for a quiet, unannounced visit, hoping to witness the impact of Sophia's work firsthand. As she entered the modest building in a part of town she hadn't frequented in years, she felt an unusual flutter of nerves. For once, she was not arriving as the powerful Aria Lancaster CEO, but as a humble observer, ready to witness the results of someone else's vision. Inside, the space was bustling with activity. Mothers attended workshops, some sat with volunteers who patiently explained budgeting and financial planning, while others practiced interview skills in a separate room. There was an atmosphere of warmth and purpose, of women supporting each other, lifting one another up in ways that transcended the typical power structures Aria had known. Sophia moved through the room with a calm, assured grace, greeting each participant with a smile, stopping to chat with volunteers, and offering words of encouragement. Her presence was magnetic, and she commanded respect without a trace of the arrogance or entitlement Aria had once clung to. Feeling both inspired and slightly self-conscious, Aria lingered at the entrance until Sophia noticed her. For a moment, surprise flashed across Sophia's face, but she quickly composed herself, approaching Aria with a warm, genuine smile. "Mrs. Lancaster," Sophia greeted, extending her hand. "I didn't expect to see you here. Welcome." Aria shook her hand. Feeling a rush of gratitude she struggled to put into words. "Sophia, please, call me Aria. And thank you for allowing me to visit your program. I wanted to see the incredible work you're doing here." Sophia's face softened, her eyes filled with pride. "Thank you, Aria. This program has been a dream of mine for years, and your foundation's support has made it possible." Aria felt a sense of humility settle over her. "The work you're doing here goes beyond anything I could have imagined. Sophia, I wanted to tell you in person, you've changed me in ways I didn't expect. Your strength, your dignity, it's been a lesson I've taken to heart." Sophia regarded her thoughtfully, her expression warm but slightly cautious. "I appreciate your honesty, Aria. I think we both know that change isn't easy, but I respect your journey." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the women around them as they learned, laughed, and supported one another. The sight was both humbling and awe-inspiring for Aria. It was a reminder of the resilience that existed outside the bubble of her privileged world, a world she had once mistaken as the only one that mattered. A young woman approached them, her face filled with a shy excitement. "Sophia, I just finished the interview skills workshop, and I think I did really well," she said, her voice brimming with pride. Sophia turned to her with a beaming smile. "That's wonderful, Jasmine. I knew you would." Jasmine looked at Aria, her expression growing more serious as she seemed to recognize her. "Are you Mrs. Lancaster, the one who funds this program?" Aria nodded, momentarily taken aback. "Yes, I am," she replied, offering Jasmine a kind smile. Jasmine's face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Lancaster. This program, it's changed my life. I used to feel like there was no way out, like my future was already decided for me. But now, I feel like I can make something of myself. I can give my daughter the life she deserves." Aria felt her throat tighten with emotion. Jasmine's words held a depth of sincerity she hadn't expected, a testament to the impact Sophia's program was having. Aria realized that these women didn't just need resources. They needed hope, dignity, and a belief in their own potential. It was something that no amount of money alone could provide. After Jasmine left, Aria turned back to Sophia, her voice thick with emotion. "I'd like to continue supporting this program, Sophia, in whatever way you need. I don't want this to be just another project for me. I want to be truly invested in what you're building here." Sophia's expression softened with understanding, and she nodded. "That would mean a lot, Aria. These women need role models, mentors who can show them what's possible. They need more than just financial backing. They need people who believe in them." Over the next several months, Aria became a frequent visitor to the program, offering her own insights, helping to secure additional partnerships, and even leading workshops on confidence and career building. She began to understand the power of connection, of building others up rather than controlling them. For the first time in her life, Aria felt that she was part of something larger than herself, something meaningful and lasting. Through these experiences, Aria and Sophia developed a bond that transcended their initial animosity. They shared stories, laughed, and confided in each other, learning from one another's strengths and vulnerabilities. Aria found herself relying on Sophia's grounded wisdom, while Sophia appreciated Aria's newfound humility and the tenacity she brought to their shared work. One evening, as they wrapped up a workshop, Sophia turned to Aria with a thoughtful smile. "You know, Aria, I believe that sometimes the people we least expect become our greatest teachers." Aria nodded, feeling the truth of Sophia's words resonate within her. "I think you've taught me more than anyone ever has, Sophia. You taught me that real power doesn't come from titles or status. It comes from self-respect and compassion. And I'm grateful for that." Sophia smiled, her eyes warm with understanding. "And you've reminded me that people can change. Sometimes it just takes one moment, one decision, to turn a life around." As Aria drove home that evening, she reflected on how far she had come since that fateful night at Ulhetoil. Her transformation had not only changed her, but had become a legacy she hoped to pass on to her son, Oliver, and to everyone who crossed her path. She no longer saw life as a competition or a struggle for dominance. Instead, she viewed it as a journey toward understanding, growth, and connection. Years later, when Oliver graduated from college and started his own journey, he thanked his mother not for her wealth or her accomplishments, but for teaching him the value of kindness, respect, and humility. Aria knew then that her journey had come full circle, that her legacy would not be one of wealth or power, but of compassion and the quiet strength she had once underestimated. And in her heart, Aria would always carry the memory of that evening at Ulhetoil, where one woman's dignity had challenged her, changed her, and set her on a path that was worth far more than any title or fortune.